11 seconds remaining. One last rush perhaps for the Flyers. Giroux to Hartnell. To Giroux. Giroux holds all the way across. Pronger scores! 2.1 seconds remaining, and the Flyers are on top.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 164. It is the Flyers season preview. So we're proud to bring you another great preview show for what might not be the best Flyers season, but it won't be boring, I can tell you that. So why don't we introduce our panel? He's been with me from the very beginning with O&B Puckcast. His name is Chef B.
What's up, guys? Opening season.
Doing?
Woo!
Yeah,
Woo-woo.
definitely. Well, there's a lot to talk about. And back with us again, and really glad to have him. He's in a limited engagement tonight, so we want to get him on quickly. He is the great Dan Silver. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm excited for some Flyers hockey. I'm going to the first two games, and I like hockey, so they may not win, but it's good. It's good to have hockey back.
Yeah, that's great. We're gonna talk about that and a lot of things coming up, and we're going to introduce our guest directly. But just wanted to remind everybody that the O&B Puckcast is on 12 or 13 different podcast platforms. iHeart, Spotify, Stitcher. Of course, it's on Apple. We also have a YouTube channel. We're on that alternative platform at Getter, Gettr, because everybody needs a backup social media plan these days. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And if you could follow, subscribe, hit your notification bells on YouTube, it really does help move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. We really do appreciate it. And we've seen the growth as a result this past year. Thank you very much for your support and your listenership. And with that, let's bring in from 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey, our old buddy, Kevin Durso. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you all?
Doing great. So I don't know if we're going to get the final cut down news for the Flyers. They may strategically be holding back to, save some money or do some things with the goaltenders. Let me get your quick reply on that in terms of what you think the final roster will be and maybe some last minute scrambling by the Flyers.
I think most of it is just the typical housekeeping type stuff. I don't think there's any surprises here. Most of it, they made a couple of moves today in terms of guys clearing waivers that went down. Jackson Cates was waiver exempt. He went down. And I think right now the holding pattern is the most obvious option that they have, which is Ryan Ellis and LTIR. I think they're just waiting to do that. So then who knows how many guys they have in mind to bring back once they do all of this. But I purposely delayed a couple minutes on you guys to see if I could get that announcement, of the roster out there. But doesn't seem like anything's coming tonight. I think they're waiting until everything comes out, although the league looks like they might have just announced all of it. So maybe we actually will have a full roster list. Oh, no, okay, never mind. It looks like it's a partial list so far. So they have what's been announced so far. Flyers are not on the list yet, so we're still speculating. But I think that there's some obvious inclusions that we can figure out by now. I kind of hinted at that in the tweet I just put out. Noah Cates has made this team. I'm pretty, Tanner Lazinski's made this team. Wade Allison has made this team. I'm pretty sure at this point Hayden Hodgson has made this team as well. Guys like that. And the only questions I really have at this point are kind of what the defensive picture looks like. Did they send down both Ronnie Addard and Igor Zamula, or did they keep one of them, or are they bringing somebody else back? What's kind of the mindset there? And goaltending wise, I don't think that they would actually keep 3 to start with. I think that if there's any challenges there, they would just make the call day of the game and say, okay, this guy's ready. Simple as that. So I think Erson would go down for the time being. And if Sandstrom's not ready to go, they would just call Erson back up in time to start the season.
I think that would be like a paper move, really. Just you don't want them in case they have to hit the road in Florida or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't think that they would necessarily tell him pack his bags and get out of Voorhees yet either. I think that they would possibly say just stay put just in case and practice for the next couple of days as if you're still up, even though, on paper he wouldn't be probably.
Gotcha. So Dan, I wanted to get your input. You didn't have the opportunity to join us last week and get some of your summation of what the exhibition games brought and some of the things that John Tortorella had to talk about.
What the exhibition games brought? Well, they didn't bring that many goals for the Flyers. They didn't bring a whole lot of impressive play from the Flyers. And it's funny, in Tortorella's opening press conference, he sort of immediately dismissed the fact that, this team could be a cup contender. He almost seems to be walking it back even more now that he's seen these guys on the ice. It just seems to be trending towards a year where we're really trying to sort of build good habits and for Tortorella to kind of figure things out. Maybe the front office didn't really have a plan this offseason and they were kind of caught in between. But my sense is that John Tortorella is kind of viewing this, and I could be wrong, is that he is now viewing this as, he's in this for the long haul. He wants to be part of a rebuild here, and he's going to do what he can to sort of help move the young guys along. But maybe he also sees that maybe there's a benefit to, not tanking, but a benefit to maybe getting a really good young player next year in the draft. I don't know if he necessarily looks at it that way, but I just sort of get the sense that he realizes where this season might be heading. There have been a couple pieces in The Athletic recently that I kind of wanted to quickly mention. One was Down Goes Brown, who's kind of sort of like their satire guy, entertaining. He wrote an article basically that was like, these 7 teams look like there's no hope for this season in the future, but, can I find some hope for them? The Flyers were among the 7, and literally they were the only one of the 7 where he said that there was no hope. So that's one sort of outside perspective of what's going on right now. The other was that The Athletic polled its readers, are you optimistic or not about where the state of your franchise? And, there were a bunch of teams that were kind of like around the 20%. And then there was like a couple teams that were like 10%. I think Arizona was maybe 8%. The Flyers fans, literally 1.7% optimistic. And it sort of goes a little bit towards, Philly fans are very bipolar. They're really, we're up or down. And the fans are just so negative right now about the Flyers. It's unbelievable. I'm going to the first 2 games as a fan. I'm going to the opener with my mom. I'm going to Saturday's game with Angry Jim, who's another podcaster who's a buddy of mine. I'm kind of really interested to see what the vibe is like because, and as a season ticket holder, it's been extremely hard to sell tickets. I'm looking forward to seeing some live hockey. I'm looking forward to seeing some of these young kids and seeing if they can improve. But it is negative town around this team right now from the fans. And so I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what it's actually like being there.
Yeah. Let me put some numbers behind the exhibition season. We'll go to Kevin, then Chef, you'll be up. The Flyers closed out the exhibition. They were 1-4-1. They were outscored 16-8. They did play better in the last two games and are more competitive throughout all through the games and throughout all three zones. So there's definitely an improvement there. But Kevin, listen, this is a team that if they get 10-point improvement, they're still going to get a very good draft pick. But thinking they're a playoff team and anything like that, I mean, it's like Jim Mora, playoffs. That's what it feels like.
That's the thing I like about John Tortorella so far is I don't think that word has also passed through his lips yet either. Forget Stanley Cup contender. He hasn't said the word playoffs either. He's very strictly talked about identity building. That's all he's talked about. And I'm fine with that because don't feed people another lie, basically. Don't feed people this type of stuff where it's like, oh yeah, we're a playoff team though. Like it's a stark contrast between the opening press conferences that everybody had on day one of training camp when the general manager says, we can't wait to go out and shock the world and prove everybody wrong. And the coach is continually telling you more and more, we got a long way to go. This isn't, there's a lot of, I have concerns, things like that. And, I gave the fans too much credit. When we did our episode of the YWT podcast yesterday and brought up that Athletic Hope-O-Meter article, and maybe I gave people too much credit because my guess on what the number was 2.2%, and that was high apparently. Yeah. So I all I had said I'd seen from that whole thing was apparently the poem titled by Chuck Fletcher, which was absolutely hysterical. Kind of made my day in the middle of this. I got to find the silver lining here wherever I can, kind of, but. The last preseason game was probably the most entertaining, but for the most part, I mean, they rode the entire preseason, 1 goal per game, very obvious, and another transparent line from Tortorella so far. This is the type of games they're going to play, whether they win or lose them. Kind of the goal is don't give up a lot, but we're not going to score a lot either because they don't have those types of players, and he knows it and he's acknowledged it, and it that very much. I believe Fletcher said at some point, one of the last couple of years or whatever, as the season went on, it got to a point like it is what it is, like in terms of what the roster is. And that's kind of the way I feel about the roster going into all this is kind of, it is what it is. This is what they have. I don't know that I see a lot of hope for any improvement here in terms of point totals. At this point, I believe I was telling somebody the other day in the first 20 games, I think they'll be lucky to have a 4-12-4 record.
I hear you. And Chef, that's kind of what you were predicting toward the end of last week's show. So it's everybody seems to be on the same page. I love how Philly fans brought the heat with that negative article, the 1.7% hope or whatever. That very good article and very reflective of how a lot of people feel. So what's on your mind?
To touch on both what Dan and Kevin both said, like Philadelphia, we're a hard on our sleeve kind of city. If you do good by us, we'll do good by you. And I think pardon the expression, I think the fan base think they were bull by current ownership. And, look at what's going on now with the Eagles and the Phillies. I mean, like you're getting so much talk about them and how excited they are to even watch the games. And here we're given 1-point-something% chance of being satisfied at all. Just being satisfied, not even being excited. There's like not a lot to be excited on this team about. And hopefully for me, I'll get to see, like Dan said, some of the young players getting in there and maybe showing an improvement. Because I remember 3 years ago we had this conversation. I think Dan said, what were the chances of all of the prospects not hitting and having crappy years at once? And we said, and I was like, you're absolutely right. I mean, they should show improvement this year. And it never happened. So there's every reason to be pessimistic because precedent has been set for this team. So, but now with Torts in there, I'm happy and satisfied with the coach because with the coach, we're not getting that any more, lies sent to us about what this team is. There's nothing wrong with it. And nothing wrong with what he's saying. It's just you can only do so much with the product in front of you. And if you can't advance the team anymore, you said, I mean, what did he say in present after practice? Like, do you think they're showing signs of improvement? And he said no. So that just goes to show right there, he's not happy about it. So why should – I mean, I'm excited, but I'm also – because I want to see the younger players get their chance. And we're obviously going to see that. But I don't want to drag this conversation on anymore. I just want to see it start and get it started so we can start pulling the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, I mean, just a little clarification on Tort's comments today. And he was talking about how well a team can shut down plays defensively in their own end, and whether the team had started to do a better job of that. He doesn't want the team to be easy to play against in the corners and shutting down plays and passes that come into the slot. And he's not satisfied. So he's going to tell you, is it improving? No, not yet. So, and that's a good thing. But, looking at it, Dan, they at least are going to get a look at guys like Allison, assuming he doesn't trip on his way on the ice in opening night. And Lazinski is going to get that fourth line role. In other words, some of these kids are really going to get a shot, and that makes it more interesting. We don't have to see guys like Zach McEwen, and God bless him, he did a good job for what he is. He gets sent down, and some tweeners like Cooper Marody and Jackson Cates, who I still at the NHL level, to me, is still a tweener, not really a full-fledged NHLer. Maybe he'll prove that wrong. But we are going to see some guys that have talent that are going to get a shot, and that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, and real quick, I think the John Tortorella factor is, for the fans, is going to be very refreshing because, as Chef and Kevin kind of alluded to, he's so honest. I mean, after one of the games, he was asked, what did he think of the Provorov-D'Angelo pairing? And he said they stunk. I mean, that's the kind of honesty where I think, and he's obviously going to be as honest with the fans as he is with the players. So, he's going to be saying the same things, if not in a harsher manner, to the players behind closed doors. That's really what not only the players need, but what this franchise needs. Like, I hope he's walking around the front office making the same comments about his opinion on things that Chuck Fletcher's doing. And, if he thinks that some guys like Bobby Clark or whoever are too involved, like making those kind of comments too, right? I think that is absolutely what is needed from top to bottom in this franchise, is some honest accountability. And so hopefully John Tortorella will bring that. Hopefully the players will listen to him, and hopefully the front office will listen to him. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, you look at the roster and it's riddled with players who we're going to find out a lot more about this year. Morgan Frost, John Tortorella said, yeah, he's very skilled, but he wants to see a little bit of, more commitment from him away from the puck. We all know that's kind of what Morgan needs to do. It'll be interesting to see that. Owen Tippett, had a problem finishing last year. That carried over into the preseason. We'll see if that can kind of improve. The point about McEwen, I mean, I actually thought he played pretty well in the last preseason game. He's not going to be a game changer, but the whole Hodgson thing is kind of interesting to me because John Tortorella basically acknowledged that he hadn't played that well in the preseason, or at least didn't excel, but he said that some other folks in the organization, probably LaPerriere, are very high on him, so he's got him in the roster. But Lazinski is a guy who I know a lot of us have been pretty high on for a while in terms of his ability to maybe be a middle six NHL player. He's good offensively, he's good defensively, and we kind of saw the swagger a little bit in the final preseason game when he scored on that breakaway goal to late in the game for the Flyers. So I'm excited he's on the roster. Him and Allison, we'll see what they can do after having 4 years in college. Hopefully Allison can stay healthy. The Noah Cates thing is very interesting to me because he's one of the most impressive players on the team last year. He's one of the most impressive players on the team this year in preseason. And now they're moving him from the wing to center. So I hope this isn't a situation where my cynical side says, oh, great, we're taking the one guy who's actually excelling in a role, and now we're going to move him into a different role. Now, I'm guessing that, John Tortorella will, if he's not able to excel as a center, will move him back to wing. But I'm kind of interested to see what happens there. They've got him on a line with Joel Farabee and Owen Tippett. And again, we'll see. But Noah Cates has been the young guy who is all along has been very consistent, very impressive, does all the little things right. But guys like Frost, Allison, Tippett, Lazinski. I think it's going to be kind of a let's see where we stand with those guys this year.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing that, you know, to what Dan was saying in the beginning of that particular segment was about how, and what Shep was talking about, they kind of really kind of lied to us about the aggressive retool. And maybe Tortorella is kind of like a Harvey Keitel, a cleaner for this organization. And he's giving the aggressive replies all across the element and segments of the organization that kind of need it, almost like a dress down. And something, Kevin, that we talked about, and Shep will get to you after that. We talked on a prior show how this might be a point at which it's going to be Tortorella contra Fletcher. You know, Tortorella leveraging his greater security and Fletcher's failures, and there might come to a head where just by force of personality and will, Chuck Fletcher might find himself out of a position here because Tortorella is addressing things that seem obvious to everybody.
Yeah, I think some of this stuff has already started, in my opinion, just the way that he's talking, the way that it kind of contradicts. You know, Chuck Fletcher's not going to speak regularly during training camp. I mean, maybe he'll speak when they actually put the roster out there. I doubt that, though. But either way, this is what you get every day. And I really think that this is becoming Tortorella's show already. It's why I tweeted what I did with all the Nick Foligno stuff over the last 24 hours, because to me, the only reason Nick Foligno is probably not a Philadelphia Flyer today is the money. That's probably the only reason, because if he didn't have a $3.8 million cap hit, I think they would have found a way to make it work. And it would have been all John Tortorella's recommendation to bring his former captain from Columbus in to be a veteran presence for this group of players, especially the amount of young guys that he's still keeping on the roster. I think absolutely that would have happened in a second. I think that's the reason that Artem Anisimov has a PTO, is because, again, it was a guy that Tortorella is familiar with. So he called that shot and said, I'm bringing in a guy who I think can help center depth because we don't have any. Like, it's kind of, without directly saying that to everybody, he said they lack center depth. They need a lot of centers. You're nothing without center depth. He kind of says that, but without saying, I didn't get any center depth from the offseason, he basically told you I got no center depth from the offseason. So that's what it comes down to. So I already think that we're seeing some of those things. I think that's why I feel the way that I do about the way the season's going to start, because it may not be it's definitely not the best roster on paper. I think we're all in agreement on that. And then the injuries just make it worse on ice, because when you take what it was supposed to be, you take Sean Couturier out of the picture, you know, maybe not for as long as everybody initially thought, but doesn't matter. You're still losing time there. I don't know what to expect. You know, I assume Joel Farabee's playing on Thursday based on the way things are going, but I don't know what to expect from him. I don't know what to expect from Cam Atkinson. I don't know what to expect from Carter Hart, because I haven't seen them yet this preseason. I have nothing to base it off of. And the funny part is I'm saying all the same things that John Tortorella is, because with the exception of Cam Atkinson, who he knows well, because Tortorella's answer to most of these questions is, I have no idea. I've got to see it, and then I'll put it together after I see it, but he needs to see it. And that to me makes it feel like it feels like even more of his show. It just feels like one of these things where he's going to be the guy who's running a lot of this and giving a lot of input. And we'll see how long that goes before something happens, before it's either record wise, hey, they didn't get off to a great start, so now a change is being made because of that reason. But it just becomes more and more, you know, I wrote what I did the day after free agency started, because that was when it became blatantly obvious that the front office was incompetent with their game plan of aggressive retool and didn't have a backup plan to whatever, you know, money they didn't move or whatever. They had no plan. And then they went through the offseason with a plan of hope that, hey, we're getting this guy back, we're getting that guy back, that'll be great. I believe I said a couple weeks ago on one of the podcasts I did that I was shocked that they actually admitted that Ryan Ellis is not expected to play this year at this stage. Like, they dug that for months a season, got to February, and then finally we're like, oh yeah, by the way, he won't play now. Okay. Yeah. After we, you know, everybody who's been down there watching every game like I am, you know, since November knew that information, or had at least had a hint of it, you know, but to finally admit it. So I was shocked about that, and to be honest, that's kind of why I'm still skeptical with Sean Couturier, because you can tell me he's, you know, I know he skated the other day and that's great. And I know that the timeline kind of got trimmed down a little bit because he doesn't need a surgery, but I kind of get skeptical and say, is 3 to 4 weeks, like, as an estimate, Is that just we're going to check back up on him and find out nothing's improved and now surgery is needed after all, and that means his season's done anyway? Like, I just don't know what to believe anymore based on recent history. So that's kind of where everything stands. And I think that that's why John Tortorella has been such a great vocal figure in all of this, because he is being honest. The line that Dan brought up, which I had the same reaction to, and I watched a lot of his press conferences when he was coaching Columbus because, well, you know, let's face it, he's nothing but pure entertainment also for hockey fans. So I watched it for that purpose as much, but I wasn't surprised that he came right out and just said, yeah, they stunk. Everybody didn't have a good game. The whole team didn't have a good game, kind of like he almost like just did that the whole way through. And it's like, okay, you know, this is what you get from him. And I think it's going to be appreciated by the fan base with the way that the team is and the state of the franchise, that you're getting that honesty.
No, it's hard to argue. Chef, Dan wants to make a quick point here. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Just real quick. What I sort of found interesting was the Farabee injury. So I believe, and I think he got injured like lifting weights or something. I don't remember exactly.
It was off-season training, something. Yeah.
But it just came out that he had artificial disc replacement surgery, I believe, which is the same thing that there was so much controversy over Jack Eichel. I mean, there were literally hundreds of pages of articles written about Jack Eichel and this experimental surgery and should he be allowed to have it and blah, blah, blah. And then it just sort of comes out, yeah, Joel Farabee, he had this surgery. So I think that there was probably an overblown reaction to the Jack Eichel decision, but I'm surprised that there hasn't kind of been as much made that Farabee had this same kind of experimental surgery, and now he's sort of being rushed back to
agree.
In the season.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's just like, once Jack Eichel broke through the barrier, and then Tyler Johnson had one as well. And I guess, with the sample of two, every injury is different. It depends on the level that is injured. We've seen this movie before with these injuries. We go in with hope. We're, like Kevin said, Atkinson, we don't know. Couturier, we don't know. Sandstrom, I don't know if it's a groin or a hip or a knee or what's going on. So, and then there's so much uncertainty on top of everything else that's going on. I mean, you think about January when Dave Scott is up there with the aggressive retool, and it's almost like Chuck was too scared to back off of that narrative. We talked about the messaging, and it's almost like John Tortorella rides to the rescue with sincerity and just frankness that is so refreshing, especially from a city, and I've said this before, that was willing to put up with 7-8 years of the process. Of course we can. We just give us some kind of concrete plan, and there wasn't one. But Chef, you wanted to make a comment.
Based on everything you guys just said, with all the uncertainties with Coots and everybody that's injured down the line, and then moving Noah Cates to center kind of like threw me off a little bit too. But that's why I thought with the quality of what they had on the team, and Jackson Cates actually played half decent. I mean, looked pretty good during preseason. I thought he had an outside chance of making the team. At maybe as a fourth line center or something along those lines, and I wouldn't have cared. And that's the thing. I think that's what I want to bring up. I don't care what it looks like right now. I want to see something that's going to show to me that we're moving forward, that we're not just playing like I don't know. Do I need to see Hodgkin? Do I? I mean, I know we signed Dolores, but do we? It's something. It's like a wasted spot on this roster right now, because you could have done a lot more with other money, and we're not getting any view of what any of these kids can do at an NHL level by dealing with all this crap now. So,
well, let me just. I think what's happening here is Tortorella and the organization really. Necessarily, because he's the one really pulling this ship now. They were trying to straddle the fence. They want to take a look at some kids who are more mature. So obviously, who qualifies in that regard? Luzinski, Allison, okay. Cates is played his way on the lineup. Tippett and Frost, they had the pedigree. So Jackson Cates is probably kind of like a tweener. In their estimation, they had Luzinski kind of locked in at that fourth line center spot, and they didn't think Jackson really could play or was worthy of playing higher in the lineup. I mean, it's just my read on it. So But then on the other hand, they're trying to be that team that, like I mentioned earlier, Torts wants to get them better at being hard in the corners and being tough to play against. And it reminds me what Sean Couturier said, Kevin, about how the Flyers were pushed around the last couple of years a lot. So I think you're trying to meld a lot of different elements that still qualify as like a ground floor project. What say you?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think a lot of that was in his answer about, let's this way. Why is Ronnie Addard still part of the roster, at least as of this moment or until we find out more tomorrow? Because he fought a guy in the last preseason game and stood in there against a bigger player. And he said, if you think I'm sending him down, you're crazy. I'm not sending him down after he did that, because that's what they want to see. And I'm not talking about the fighting portion of it, but the guy who stands in and takes it and responds to it. And I think that there's enough guys that he has looked at that he feels like haven't done that and haven't responded in that way. And yeah, I know that because I know you guys are going to get into Cam York in a little while too, because it's obviously one of the big names who didn't make it. And I think that's exactly where it comes from, that there's expectations. And I think that this is an element of pushing. This is what he does. This is what a John Tortorella camp is. He pushes players to kind of embody that identity that he wants his team to have. And if they don't take that step or do it consistently or stand out in that respect, then he's going to send them where they can develop. And I don't know how many times in a row he said the whole thing about that the American League's a great developmental league and all that type of stuff. And he's not wrong about that, but I think we all kind of look at this team in the way that it is now and also say, why not throw them into the fire too? Like, why not just give them the chance to play against the guys they're going to play against, instead of saying play against, somebody else's tweeners like we're talking about now too. Like, that's not the level of competition that you jump to in the NHL. But I look at a guy like Noah Cates and I say, okay, Noah Cates has embraced that. That's why he's here. He had one of the best camps because he embraced that role and he does do those things. He plays the game away from the puck as well as he does with it. He had standout moments with and without the puck. So that's why he ends up staying here. And I can't deny that I'm not going to disagree with John Tortorella and say I thought Cam York stood out. He didn't to me either. He kind of blended in. And I think they have higher expectations for him, which is why that happens. So, yeah, I agree with that. I think he's trying to carve out an identity. And if you don't fit that identity, I mean, he made it abundantly clear that they're not afraid to leave people behind if you're not caught up in terms of the conditioning or if you're not, I guess, delivering that kind of mindset of for the team kind of thing. So I think that Cam York is just an example of that if you're not there yet, then you're going to go back and you're going to work your way to being there at the minor league level.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dan, I know you got to scoot very shortly. I just wanted to get your take on what the defense looks like. It looks like the top four are pretty much set, but get your comments on how the whole thing with York was handled and the dynamic between Braun, Sealer, Addard, Samula, what you expect.
So Cam York, he's still young, but I'm starting to wonder if the offensive upside that you'd hope he would have for someone being drafted where he was when you passed over Cole Caulfield twice to get Cam York is actually sort of exists. And one of the things I've talked about the last few years with Cam York is that I've always thought there's sort of this like untapped offensive aggression that is going to come out of him one day. You watch him in college and he was probably the best defenseman in college at doing the wraparound. He scored a bunch of wraparound goals going around the goal from left to right, really nice wraparound goals. And then at times he would look sort of like Quinn Hughes on the power play where he would, shake and bake and make a nice pass to set someone up, which gave me this thought that kind of like there's this level that he can get to, right? He hasn't shown it whatsoever to me in the NHL. Truth be told, I haven't watched a lot of his games in the AHL, so I don't know if he's gotten there yet. But I was sort of expecting him to come into camp and show off some aggressiveness and some flair that might let him stand out. And he really, like you said, Isaiah, he just sort of blended in. He really wasn't all that impressive, and he almost got worse as the preseason went on, whereas a guy like Ronnie Addard, I thought got a little bit better as the preseason went on. And so first of all, I have some concerns about Cam York and his long-term potential. The other thing is that John Tortorella has made a big deal about accountability. He's going to hold players accountable. And when you've got a guy like Cam York, who you're expecting to see a lot from, not only don't you see it, but he sort of gets worse as the preseason goes on. I don't know if it was the last game or the second last game where he made a really bad play on the power play, got burned by, I think it was Casey Cizikas. Cizikas, and the Islanders scored. And it was just a terrible way for Cam York to sort of go out in the preseason. So for a guy like Tortorella, after you have a preseason like that, you cannot have the guy start the season in the NHL, because it just sort of undermines what the message that you're trying to send to your team. So I applaud them sending him down. I hope that he can get to the point that we all sort of hope he can. I'm not sure if he will or not. We'll see. You talk about the defense as a whole. I have major concerns of how Tony DeAngelo is going to fit as the top pair defenseman playing with Ivan Provorov. Because if you look at the guys that Provorov has really played well with, it's basically been Matt Niskanen, who's a stay-at-home defenseman, and Ryan Ellis for the few games they were together. Looked really good. And Ellis and Niskanen are similar players. They're very solid. They're reliable. Provorov knows he can roam a little bit, and those guys are going to be there. They're always there for him to kind of pass the puck over to in his own zone. DeAngelo is very talented, and he's really going to help the power play, but I don't think that his lack of defensive acumen is really going to mesh that well with Ivan Provorov. I've sort of seen some blind optimism from people online saying they think that it will, but I'm not convinced it will, and so I'm a little bit concerned about that top pair. And I have concerns about Ivan Provorov because his development is sort of stalled out. And I'm also, interested to see how Provorov is going to do with Tortorella, because it seems to me that Provorov maybe has a inflated opinion of himself on the ice. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I don't know how he'll do with some John Tortorella dressing down. We'll see what happens there. I think that Travis Sanheim was the best Flyers defenseman last year, and he might be gone because he's got 1 year left and he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. So I think that's going to be really interesting. Wasn't that impressed with Ristolainen last year, and of course they signed him to the 5-year extension.
Oh, of course.
So that second pair is okay. I think Sanheim still has some upside to be one of the better offensive defensemen in the league. We'll see if he gets there. And then the third pair is going to be below tier third pair with Sealer and Braun, and maybe Zamula or Addard work their way into it. But and the defense is supposed to be the strong suit of this team, right? But I have major concerns about that top pair. I think the second pair is fine. The third pair is not very good. But a lot of it really is going to depend on how DeAngelo meshes with Provorov. And so I hope I'm wrong. I think if I had to do a percentage chance, I'd say maybe 70% chance that it doesn't work with those two guys and 30% that it does work. So hopefully the 30% kicks in. But that's my biggest concern about the defense grouping is how Provorov and DeAngelo mesh. Because I think it could be not very good.
Yeah, no, it's hard to disagree. I don't. Someone made a comparison with Tony DeAngelo and Jacob Slavin, and Jacob Slavin is just so sure-handed and calm, cool, and collected with the puck. And Provorov, even at his best, was not really in that realm, that tier. So it's going to be an adventure because both players, particularly Provorov, when he's going through a bad run, the puck can be like a bomb on a stick. And then with Tony taking some chances and kind of like Gostisbehere, once the puck gets behind DeAngelo, he's a different player. And it's going to be an adventure. There's no doubt. Kevin, I want to ask you about the goaltending situation. A lot of concerns with Carter Hart and him not really playing, and everybody's kind of hoping and thinking he'll be okay. And then the whole dynamic between the two Swedes, Sandstrom, who's probably who's a better fit to be a backup, and Ursan, who could kind of be someone to come on in future years. Where do you see that landing this year?
So I'm not overly concerned about Carter Hart just because, he's practiced for enough in between the supposed injury when it happened and how long it's been. So he didn't get into a game. I think that was done purposely just to avoid anything If he was going to get into a game, it would have been that last home game that they had. So I'm not worried about it. I think that the idea that he was always going to be the opening night starter, that they kept saying they're confident he would be, I think that was fair because there was no reason to, there's a difference between Carter Hart practicing for the week leading up to the game and being confident that he'll start, and Cam Atkinson still not being on the ice as of today and saying they're optimistic he'll play too. Like there's at least a little bit more of a timeline that you can go back to. So I think Carter Hart will be the goaltender. I think the question is how long, I looked at all 4 goalies that really got regular time. I'm throwing Hart into that, even though he didn't play a preseason game, but the other 3 obviously played a lot. Sandstrom played a lot, Eriksson played a lot, and Troy Grosnick played a lot. And there's this hunch that I have that we're going to see all 4 of them at some point in the season. That you've got two goalies in particular in Sandstrom and Eriksson who both in their developmental years have had injury trouble. Eriksson's been out for times. Sandstrom's been out for times. It's just something that's part of it. And then they're, goalies have, with the workload that they get in their style of play, they can get more frequently injured. Let's face it. Adding Hart to the mix of that, though, too, considering that, he's kind of been phased out of the end of the last couple of seasons because of things like this. And I think that half of, 50% of that is there's nothing left to play for. Don't throw him out there, even if he could play. But he still was hurt at the end of those years. So I am concerned that it's happening this early in that sense. I think he'll be fine for the first handful of games, but then it's going to be something to monitor. In terms of the other 2, though, and who you throw into the backup, I always thought Sandstrom was the guy who's more ready for the backup role at this stage of things. But I was really impressed with Eriksson during the preseason. I thought that he had a really strong camp and probably turned more heads than expected. And ironically enough, we've been saying all this stuff about John Tortorella and his input on the team and all that stuff like that. And he's absolutely not the guy to ask about goaltending because apparently he doesn't watch them. He just talks to Kim Dillabaugh and says, who stands out to you? Okay, we'll go with that. So I actually found that to be interesting because he talks about how he observes goalies in terms of how they carry themselves, which I think is a big thing for Carter Hart, honestly, because it's, when you're playing behind this defense, and I'm with Dan on this, I'm not impressed by it either. I definitely don't love the third pairing. And I have the same concerns because we talked about that D'Angelo and Slavin kind of comparison when he was first acquired back in the summer. I was on with you guys right after that trade happened. And to me, there's no comparison there. He's not Jacob Slavin. Like Jacob Slavin is a really good all-around defenseman who can kind of provide a little bit of both sides of those things. He's not. He's, I'm not going to deny he can help the power play, and I'm not going to deny he's good at maybe outletting the puck out of his own zone, whether skating it or making that quick first pass. But defensively, I didn't see a lot that would make me be convinced that that's going to work either. So, and not for nothing, but when your coach turns around and says, you know what, I want my defensemen to make aggressive mistakes, and like mistakes are mistakes, but they need to be aggressive mistakes. So we're going to give up a 2-on-1. That's what we have a goalie for. I immediately think of Carter Hart and then go, I feel bad for this guy again, because if you're giving up 4 or 5 of those a game, how many of them eventually find the back of the net because he's the last line of defense or whatever the case may be, So I'm bracing myself for that side of it for sure, but I do think that they've gotten some good foundational play from the goaltending, at least. It's actually probably been their strongest area the entire preseason because they haven't had goal scoring. Defensively, they've had their moments, but I think goaltending, they actually held up pretty well, all things considered. I mean, health-wise, certainly concerns, but performance-wise, it was probably their strongest area of the preseason.
Interesting. Yeah, there's just a thing about the defense. I noticed that Tortorella called Nick Seeler something, a term I had never heard before, a trier. If you get a trier, to means like not a lot of talent. So he cares, he works hard, but that's more or less saying the guy pretty much sucks, but he busts his chops out there, and I appreciate it. Interesting choice of terminology. But so we're going to continue, by the way, on with the chef and Kevin. Dan had to head out with an engagement, and we appreciate his contributions. You can follow Dan on Twitter at dsilver88 at dsilver88. So, chef, so let's take a look at some of these lines. So far, and this is going to change. That's one thing I got to tell everybody. And I put this out there on Twitter. Whatever the lines are today with Tortorella, I mean, the word capricious comes to mind, but I think maybe it's more like Tortorella is constantly strategizing to try and put combos together. But right now, if the Flyers have a first line, it's probably Hayes with Lawton and Konechny until I guess Atkinson gets back. So that'll shift the dynamic. This is how they lined up, and then you have Noah Cates with Tippett and Farabee, and that's a maybe. We think he's going to play the opening game. And then we have Frost in between JVR and Allison. And the fourth line appears to be Lazinski with Delorier and Hayden Hodgson. And then, of course, Provorov with Tony DeAngelo, Travis Sanheim and Rasmus Ristolainen, Nick Seeler and Justin Braun is what I predict. I think Addard and Zamula are probably going to start mainly because of their waiver status. It might have been different had it not been the case. And Carter Hart is going to be your starter. And eventually, if he's healthy, Sandstrom will be your backup. If not, it will be Ersan, and that's the Flyers. So just your assessment, knowing that Couturier could come into the lineup and Atkinson could come out.
Well, all right. Is it a little underwhelming? It's a little underwhelming, to say the least. Is it what it is? It is what it is. Unfortunately, this is what we're stuck with, guys. Like I said, the only good thing is, guess what? You have to play the kids now. We always wanted them to play the kids to see what we got, and guess what? Because of cap reasons and because of injuries and because of everything that's going on else with this team, at least we're going to get to see the young players play. So that's my story this season, and I'm sticking to it. I'm going to say, hey, at least I get to see the young kids play.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, the thing that from the Flyers' perspective, and the three of us, what we have going for us probably over most of the other shows is the amount of time that we've probably watched this team a combined 120 seasons, right? So yeah, I'm the one that really pulling everybody down. But what is the goal this year? I mean, would it have been better had they aggressive retool been like aggressive rebuild? Had it been like had they torn this down and not signed Ristolainen, but they didn't do that. But now it's like they pivoted back to kind of like a rebuild stance. I mean, it's like you said earlier, it's crystal clear that John Tortorella has taken the lead, and it's like, holy crap, this is really bad. We got to scale back our rhetoric and orient it more toward the rebuild. So, what's your feeling about all that?
Yeah, because I think John Tortorella is not really a 30,000-foot kind of view kind of guy, So when you get that view, which is the view that we have when we, especially that I do when I cover the team. I'm not talking about how high up we are in the press box, obviously, but but like either way, it's when you're covering a team, and for me, I'm part of my coverage is not just watching them; it's watching everybody as much as I can to make sure I'm telling people about these other guys out in the league too. You're watching so much that it's kind of like I can't tell you the ins and outs of the operations of every other team in the league. I can do it for this one because this is where most of my time goes. But that's kind of the way it is for Tortorella, especially when he's working ESPN for the last year. I'm sure he had a sense that there were some things that were off, but you don't know until you get in there and actually start working day to day. He got in there and started working day to day and got a pretty harsh realization that they don't have a lot of what he expected at all, I think. And I'm not talking about just from like, he's had teams that don't have as many skill guys. I mean, that was a lot of his Columbus tenure, to be honest. Like, did they really have skill guys up until Panarin showed up and Duchesne was part of that group and things like that? He kind of had to turn some of those guys into skill players. Like I look at the Cam York thing, not to go back on a previous topic, but Cam York in being sent down, I think they view Cam York, or at least I hope that Tortorella views Cam York in the same light that he viewed kind of Seth Jones or Zach Werenski when he got to Columbus. And Zach Werenski was 19 years old, and Seth Jones was a little older at that point, had just come over in a trade in the middle of that season that Tortorella started. And it's like, you're going to get your hands on these guys at an early stage of their career, and you can be the one who turns it around for them and brings out the best in them on both sides. I think that that's what the goal is. And I think that Tortorella embraces that possibility. It's just, and I'm sure that goes into the reasoning behind some of the coaching staff. Like, he leans on Bradshaw like nobody's business. And I think Bradshaw is heavily responsible for what Zach Werenski has turned out to be and what Seth Jones turned out to be. So I think that that's a hopeful thing, but the players have to be receptive of it too. I mean, it's not like everything was a perfect marriage in Columbus where there weren't guys who didn't work out. They had moments where, they had that year where they kind of shocked the world in the first round of the playoffs with all the guys that everybody knew that they had. And then next year they were gone. So that's kind of something that you have to deal with. And I just think that he kind of got a really harsh reality check. And has it changed the way that they think things? The issue with the aggressive retool and maybe the pivot to a rebuild kind of thing, to go back to your question, is we all know that they won't say that, and I was just, right before I came on this morning, they dropped a new 32 Thoughts podcast, and Elliot Friedman flat out said it on the podcast. There's like this sense that Connor Bedard or something similar would not be the worst thing to happen, but they don't want to say it. And Chicago is doing what they're doing and basically saying that's what the goal, kind of the end goal is. And Arizona's doing that, and the Flyers won't go there. And they've never gone there. And the one thing that Friedman said that I agree with wholeheartedly, that Jeff Marek, his partner on the podcast, did not agree with, because his take was, you can't tell the fans that and expect them to be okay with it. That it's the whole concept that the fans are not okay with saying these things and the organization's not okay with saying these things. And Friedman disagreed, and I disagree also. I think that if you came out and said it, that you got to take a couple steps back for a year or two to get these pieces that are going to make you better in the long run, then I think that the fans would be on board with it. I think the fans are already on board a little bit with the idea of, like we've been talking about, the idea that you're seeing a younger lineup of guys that nobody knows. I mean, there's going to be people who show up down there to watch a game that maybe haven't in a little while. They're not going to know half the players on the roster. And that's probably a good thing. It's a good thing to have these they're younger players. And granted, if you're, for the people who listen to you guys or who listen to me when I go on 97.3 or who watch every game like we all do, okay, you're not really like sitting here going, yeah, another year of Morgan Frost and hopefully he develops and all that type of stuff. Like, people are very familiar with Morgan Frost at this point, but Noah Cates, Wade Allison, Tanner Lazinski, I think there's a lot of possible potential to unlock with those guys if Tortorella is the guy to bring it out. And I think Tortorella could be. I think everybody thinks that John Tortorella is the dinosaur who doesn't know how to work with the kids. And I think he's evolved a little bit. And hopefully that has that kind of effect on those players, because those players are exactly the ones that I think would be the likely sources to step up and change not the perception, I want to say, but like almost change the results. Like, for everybody who, and it's been said a lot, who's afraid of the idea that they might overachieve because John Tortorella teams overachieve. They start to play this style where they stifle you defensively and they score 2 or 3 goals at most and they find a way to win because goaltending and defense is the answer. I think that those are the guys right there. Your Noah Cates, and maybe if Morgan Frost takes that step because it is a different coach for him, or Owen Tippett or Wade Allison or anybody who comes into play and starts to play a different game because of the fact that it's John Tortorella's game that they're playing, not Mike Yeo, not Alain Vigneault, not one of those guys. Maybe it's this, and maybe that's where the overachievement comes from, because I don't see it with the guys that we've seen for the last 5 years. I don't see that kind of change happening, but I do see the overachievement from guys who are like, you know what, I'm in an NHL lineup on day one and I want to stay there. So I am going to overachieve, and I'm going to do everything in my power to be what this coach wants me to be. Those are the guys I think that I don't want to use the word like that it's a risk that they hijack the season, so to speak, because that's what everybody doesn't want it to be. But those are the guys that I think would be the ones to do it. And if they don't take that step, whether it's because they're not conditioned at that level yet, because I mean, let's face it, when Noah Cates is playing, if he stays up the whole year, let's say, once he gets to February, he's going to be at the point where he's played more games in a season than he ever has before. It's just reality. You don't just come from college, sign on, and then go from playing 25, 30 games in college to 65, 70 games, and you're pushing April, and it's like, okay, this is double what I've ever played before in my life, and at that intensity level, obviously. So that's where I think that fear comes from, that these players who are younger, and anybody who's not here too, because I don't think he's afraid to grab somebody like I fully expect there to be a lot of eyes on Tyson Forrester. I think Cam York's not down there for long. I don't think that some of these other guys who could go down, if they send the 2 defensemen down, if they send Zamula and Addard down, I don't think it's going to be long-term things. I think they see them eventually either being necessities to call up because somebody else got hurt, or see them as you're probably outperforming what we have. So we're going to give it a shot, because I think that's the way that John Tortorella coaches, that we're going to give it a shot. And if that guy runs with the opportunity, embraces it, does what I want to see, then I'm keeping him in the lineup. And I don't care about what the history says for the guy who was in that spot before him.
No, I agree. And I totally agree with you and with Elliot Friedman's assessment. Again, like I mentioned earlier, this is the city that bought into the completely ridiculous sounding idea of the process. Mm-hmm. And this is why I was so sanguine on what the Rangers did, coming out with a letter. And, Toronto did a lot of the same things. We talked about it in previous shows with somebody like Mike Babcock, who at that point had a lot of cachet with the fans before, the scandal and all that. He said, oh, there's going to be pain. We're going to have some pain. I totally agree with that. That's what we want. This is also why I think Tortorella is so refreshing. Chef?
Yeah, and we didn't. It was kind of later stuff in a day, so I don't know if you guys probably saw it because you were on. That's why I don't want to take steps backwards. Like former Flyer Wayne Simmons was available for trade or for waivers or whatever. And there was a lot of people out there saying, hey, bring him back. Somebody else said, make him a captain, on a team and ride with that because this team needs some balls or something. But look, we've already seen that. We've seen Wayne in his heyday at his best. I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to do a retread. And that's why I think it's so important what Kevin said about if you get a young kid and he makes it stick and he's trying to make it stick and he's no worse off than what you have right now, what's the difference? You know what I mean? And if he's actually a little bit better, maybe he does things a little bit better than Sealer does, or anything. I just want to see something new. At least when I go to a game now or watch a game at home or sitting in the press box or whatever it is, and I'm watching a game, at least it's new names, and half the team is going to be new names for a lot of people, like Kevin said, and at least it won't get boring in that aspect.
No, and I definitely see that because they, you get a guy like Simmer, a guy loved the Wayne train, but he can't get from point A to point B anymore. He's not the same player. He can't score the way he did. His legs are not what they were. And look, they've done that. Okay. And if a better version of that would be, like Kevin said earlier, somebody like Nick Foligno, who kind of would be a better liaison for what Torts is trying to put across here. And he's also got more miles on the tank left. But I'm not going to say I'd be that enthusiastic for that as it was. So we'll see what happens. Like Kevin said, there's going to be a fluid situation in their roster. There's nothing that's concrete, set in stone with this team. And so for me, just to kind of recapitulate, this is about instilling a culture and installing a structure, what they call the standard, whatever you want to call it. I saw the 3 episodes of the standard, and it was funny because Anthony Sanfilippo, I don't know if you saw this, Kevin, the second episode, it was kind of embarrassing. If you saw the standard, how they kind of featured Ole Lixell, and then whoop, he's gone. It's kind of like, it's like Stalin's Politburo. It's like he never existed, I mean, he is so buried in Lehigh Valley, and it just seems like somebody was out of touch there,
Well, they talked about the one little, I think it was in that second episode too. I don't remember if it was or not, but they had that little, it's like semi-scripted meeting because they have to put the cameras in there. So everybody who's in the room knows the cameras are there, but they're having a meeting about what player, like this is the list of players that Tortorella said stood out to him. Let's talk about them kind of thing. Like it just looks awful. Kind of like I actually like some of the behind the scenes stuff. Like when they showed him taking batting practice with the Phillies and it's like, okay, that's fun. Like you want to like, I actually laughed about that because I said only a Canadian guy like Rob Thompson, who's the manager of the Phillies, would know where Travis Konechny played his junior hockey. That's a Canadian for you. But yeah, it did seem weird. By the way, I did like him in camp, by the way. Lixel has some wheels on him. I think he's got some potential. I didn't expect him to make the team per se. I know it's funny that they featured him like that. And then, by the way, a day later you're cut. But regardless, I kind of even looked at some of his numbers because he was playing in a Swedish league before, and it's like, he had some scoring potential over there. I wouldn't be surprised if, at the AHL level, if he's a 15, 20 goal kind of guy right off the bat, because he probably has the skill to compete with players on that level. And it might be a little bit of an adjustment process for him, but I could see him having the type of first season that, and he's older, obviously, so that'll help. But I could see him having that kind of same way that Tyson Forster adjusted when he got to the AHL that first year. And it was like, hey, that second half of the year was, he was pretty darn good in that second half of that first year he played in the AHL, where he finally got some consistent scoring going. So I could see something like that happening. But yeah, I mean, that whole thing, that was part of the first kind of indications that this is like Tortorella's show, because they made a whole deal of it, because I think it was because that was the whole meeting, the general manager meeting, and all the front office management were talking about Lixel. And then the coach kind of comes back and hits you with the reality, like, nope, not ready for my team. And he's gone, and that's one of the things that kind of frustrates me about a little bit with Cam York also, because like a lot of response to Cam York was, I thought he said he plays the kids, and I'm going through the roster that we think we're going to see within the next 12 to 24 hours. And I'm like, how many forwards on the team, or among, if you count Addard and Zamula also, how many of those guys are 25 and under? It's half the team, just like they said it was going to be. So it's not like they didn't decide to play younger players. It's he did what he said he was going to do, which is hold people accountable. Cam York had a horrible final preseason game. And to be fair, did exactly what he didn't want to see on that power play that the Flyers had, where they gave up the shorthanded goal. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't aggressive. That's playing passive. And Tortorella wanted to see if he was going to mess up there, at least do it in an aggressive way. Figure out a way to try to go and make that play. And if you get stripped and a guy makes a good play on you, he makes a good play. But at least you were being aggressive. He got caught on his heels and didn't know how to react to it. And when that happens, a coach is going to notice in that one-on-one that you didn't get aggressive. And that's part of the reason why he got sent down. So I think that that's just living up to what you said you were going to do all this time, is I'm holding the players accountable, and it's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a dual purpose season. They're straddling the fence with things that seem like they're at cross purposes, but not really. And if we can't have an aggressive retool, we got to be aggressive on the ice. Chef?
Well, yeah. And to even dive further into that, look, what did we get? Like, you get fans saying that like TK is dogging it one night, or a veteran player's dogging it another night. If you expect him to hold Hayes, TK, Provorov, all these people that you hear about on Twitter that think might not be pulling their own, if you expect him to bench one of these guys, he's got to be consistent across the board. He has to do it with the young players when they're not playing better either. So he just people complaining about like, oh, there he goes with the kids again. Mm-hmm. He's just being consistent. He's being true to what he said he was going to do, and it has nothing to do with who the player is. It's how the player is. Is he doing the right things? Is he not playing? If he thinks that kid is holding back even a little bit, he's not going to be playing. So kudos to him. I was happy because I thought Cam had a really good shot at being the sixth D man, and he choked on it big time. And I really think he did. He didn't. I don't know if it was limelight or which I don't think it would be, or he just wasn't prepared for camp. Maybe it was the fact that he wasn't prepared. Maybe a lot of these guys did not understand what a Torts training camp is. So I think it could. I think a lot of that can attest to a lot of how these players are going up and down.
And it makes perfect sense because like he said from day one, Tortorella said from day one, I don't care what draft pick you are. I don't care what your previous, track record is. I'm going to look at it today and I'm going to make a decision today. Noah Cates is probably one of the best players in camp. He's a former 5th round pick, and Cam York's a 1st round pick. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
Cam York didn't have a spot on the roster because he was a 1st round pick that everybody thought should be there. And in fairness to that, the detail that he had in talking about York goes a long way. When he can kind of point out what he wants to see, that doesn't mean that this is, like he said, it seemed like doing this is it feels like they throw the guy away and that means he's done for it. No. He gave specific instructions. This is what I want to eventually see from him. We've had those conversations. I got to draw the most out of him right now. This is the best place to draw the most out of him there. And it's as simple as that. And it now, I feel like a broken record saying this every year, but it's on the player to do that, and we'll see which players respond to that kind of stuff and you guys alluded to it right at the top of it. John Tortorella is not going anywhere anytime soon.
Nope.
Whether it's a good year or a bad year, he's the safest guy in the organization. So I think that, you need to embrace what the coaching style is, because if you can't take it, then you might not be here next year if that's possible. And, that's where it goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously Torts saw casual where others might have seen calm, cool, and collected. Mm-hmm. And there's that fine line. I know it's something Terry Murray talked about with Robert Haig back a few years ago. He had some casual in his game and he had to get that out. Now we're comparing a guy who was like a 6'7" defenseman in Haig to Cam York. It's different. The expectations should be higher for Cam York, but he's got more talent and the pedigree is greater. So I think we come to a point in the show where we can tell people that the Flyers are going to open this Thursday at the Wells Fargo Center versus the Jersey Devils at 7 p.m. Then they have a later afternoon game on Saturday the 15th. And then they go on the road for that wonderful Florida experience with Tampa Bay in Florida. And I believe that is a Tuesday, Wednesday game on the 18th and 19th. And we're going to let those 4 games play out before we join you. But, before we go, we got to have predictions because that's part of the fun here. So being a host, I'm going to take this privilege and say that the Flyers are going to be 10 points better than last year. So that means it'll be at 71 points. They are going to have the 4th or 5th worst record in the NHL, which means they'll still have a chance to get some of these top players. And remember, people were talking about there's only 3 top franchise type players in the coming draft. You have Bedard, Mishkov, the Russian, and then we have Adam Fantilli, I think his name is. You know what? We've learned year after year, everything can change. I mean, look at Shane Wright versus Slukowski and where some of these guys moved up. Cale Makar ended up probably being the best player in the 17 draft. What happens by the time they're ready to be drafted between now and then? It could be everything. I remember Angelo Esposito into the bargain too, like 10 years ago. He was like the kid. And now, by the time his draft rolled around, I think he was taken late in the 1st round. Don't panic. If they're 4th or 5th overall, they're going to have a chance to draft a very good player. And that's what I'm going with. So Kevin, what's your, is it reasonable to come up with a number that you think the Flyers can hit?
I'm struggling getting much further than 20 some odd wins, honestly. Like the thing for me it's tough to put a prediction on it. And I understand why John Tortorella is not a prediction guy as you ask me this, because I don't really have a good one. Is if they're going to put together wins, I think it's going to come down the stretch. Like it's going to be very much like, toward the end of last season when the Flyers were kind of lingering around that 3rd or 4th worst record kind of thing. For a little while, it wasn't a guarantee who was going to get the worst record either. Montreal and Arizona were going back and forth, and they all kind of seemed to build on something down the stretch because they were playing spoiler at the end, and they finally got some consistency in their own games, because by that point, when the deadline is passed and you're playing with the same guys for the rest of the season, sometimes things come together. I don't know who's even going to be here post deadline yet. because you guys already mentioned, Travis Sanheim came up already about being an expiring contract, and I don't know where that's going to go, to be honest. Because I think he's somebody they would like to build around, but he's also going to be the most valuable trade chip they have if they're out of it, assuming they're out of it by the deadline, like most of us do. So I don't know. I mean, I look at the roster at least today, and maybe the biggest X factor of the possible point prediction is if and when Sean Couturier comes back. When they get that player back in there, if they do, that will change things, because he's going to be able to produce a little. He's not going to completely go silent. So that could win them a few extra games. Maybe with Couturier in the lineup, they go from 21, 22 wins to 26 and can probably put up 55 to 60 points. I think they're kind of right around the same ballpark as last year. Like, I really don't see much improvement point wise. I think that what will happen is that you won't see as many 7-0 kind of games. Like, I don't think they're going to get the doors blown off them as much as they have in previous years, because that's just not John Tortorella. They'll have competitive games. I think that's honestly a goal for Tortorella is, listen, they're not going to win games, but if they're competitive in them, maybe they squeeze out a point here and there. So I think that maybe is where you're coming from, Isaiah, where it's like, if they were to just get a bunch of extra points here because of overtime, and they're in tie games, they don't win them, but they're in close games, that might be a place where they do get some extra points. So that's fair to think. So, yeah, but I don't know if they're going to win enough games to go that much higher than last year. That's kind of where I'm struggling with it. So I'm kind of still in the 60-point range, and it's definitely bottom 5. If it's on the end of 60, if it's not much more than 60, then it's probably bottom 3, to be honest, because it's going to be a competition with Chicago and Arizona for me right now, at least. And if something changes drastically, I'll be the first one to admit that I was wrong about that. But I'm just calling them like I see them right now. Absolutely. Chef?
68. I think that they'll do a little bit better, and for the same exact reason. I think I said last week, like Kevin mentioned at the beginning of the show, I don't think they get out of the first 20 games with more than 4 wins. But then maybe as they get towards the back end of the season, once they start playing into the way Torts' game is and actually start believing in their results because they're still in these games and they think they can overachieve a little bit more towards the back end of the season, I think they'll pick up their points there as well. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with 68. But I will say this: I'm still gonna go and put $50 on them to make the playoffs, because I know that number, that spread's got to be so much higher. Because last I checked, I think they were at 3% making the playoffs. And if you just got, the dividends that I'll pay, and that's 50 cents a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, Money Puck had them at 15.9% chance of making the playoffs. That's higher than I would have went.
Yeah, that's a lot higher than I would have thought. I thought they were in like single digits. So, hey.
Yeah, no, Montreal, Arizona, and Chicago are 3 that come to mind that are in the single digits. Let me double check that. But while we're on that subject, Chicago's 10.2%. So Arizona's got to be sucking up all the air out of that room. They're brutal, but nobody's throwing it more than Chicago this year, right?
But they got Ghost.
Well, they don't have a ghost of a chance. Yeah, AZ is 6.6%. Again, it's just Money Puck. This one source is not the be all end all, but yeah. So, we'll see. So we want to venture into a league analysis. We're not going to be here all night, but just pick the Stanley Cup final and a rationale for that. And Kevin, if you want to venture into this territory, feel free to do so.
Sure. It's going to be a tough year to do this with right now, especially at the early going of it, because there was, I don't really remember an off season quite like this where so many players changed hands. It felt like it was a lot of movement. So I don't have a great read on a lot of teams yet. I can't come up with anybody out of the West that's better than Colorado still. I can't do it. So they're still the class of the West, and they're definitely the best team in their division. I don't know if anybody's got anything to challenge them in that conference. maybe, you know, like I even look at the Pacific Division and I go, the same two teams that were there last year are the two that are probably going to be there this year. It's still Calgary and Edmonton. It's still Battle of Alberta time. So, and don't get me wrong, as a hockey fan, I certainly enjoy a good Battle of Alberta too. So I'll take that in the playoffs to see who gets to maybe play Colorado, but that's a long way off. The East is going to be interesting because I keep coming back to probably the same 2 or 3 teams that everybody expects to be there at the end. You know, I don't know if Tampa is going to pull it off again this year. I know I expect them to be there beyond the first round of the playoffs, but that's where I think things get a little bit hazy. I think that the Rangers are going to have a pretty solid year. And I assume Carolina is going to be right there too, because Carolina seems to put it together. And I love their coach and I love the way that they handle everything. So I would say that those are the 3 that stand out the most. On YWT yesterday, we did all the who we thought were going to make the playoffs, and most of these divisions are process of elimination. I just started pulling out teams that I don't think are going to make it, and then you kind of came out with certain teams. But for the most part, there's a lot of teams that I think are stuck in the middle here. Like I still have Florida making the playoffs. I have Toronto making the playoffs. I still have Pittsburgh and Washington probably making the playoffs out of the Metro. But it doesn't mean that I think they're going to make it by a lot that makes me convinced that they're cup contenders. Like I think Carolina is going to have a really strong regular season. The Rangers will have a strong regular season. Tampa will have a strong regular season. And you know what? If you're asking me on October 10th, who makes the Stanley Cup final out of the Eastern Conference, I'm going to say the Rangers today.
Okay. So the Rangers and Colorado. And maybe you want to hold your cards until you get there, or do you want to make a pick, or you don't think anybody's going to beat the Colorado Avalanche?
I really like that Colorado team, and despite the fact that they don't have Kadri anymore, and they don't have Burakovsky, and they don't have Kemper anymore, something still tells me that it's really hard to bet against McKinnon and Landeskog and Rantanen and Makar. That those 4 are so much higher than, you know, a lot of teams top 4 around the rest of the league. I mean, Toronto is one of the few teams that can probably compete with that. Tampa's got a group like that, but I mean, Tampa's played a lot of hockey in the last few years. I just think that, again, it's going to catch up with them again this year, kind of like it did in the final last year. Somebody who hasn't been there yet. That's why I think I'm leaning the Rangers, because somebody who hasn't been there yet that's on the rise is going to emerge when the playoffs start. So that's kind of my feel on that. But I still think for right now, I'm picking Colorado as the repeat winner, because I can't come up with anybody who, you know, maybe as the season goes on, my mind will change as we get closer to the playoffs. And it's like, no, somebody really emerged. But, you know, I think enough teams took steps back in the East also that makes me think we're not going to have that. Like, you're not going to have the President's Trophy going to Florida this year. It's not going to be anything close to that. Yep. Florida probably actually, from 120 points in the regular season last year, I think they might have lost as many as 20 points in the standings this year because of how much better Ottawa is and how much better Detroit is. And that's, you know, those points, they're going to win more games. Those points have got to come from somewhere. And I think that, you know, Tampa's going to hold as one of those teams that wins a lot of games, and Toronto's going to win a lot of games. I don't think Florida's going to win as many games. And that's the team that I think comes out of it.
It's funny you should say Ottawa, because I think Senators could be one team that really lights it up this year. I don't expect them to get to the, to the conference, but I think that they could be playing for the conference. So I think it, and if the Panthers really slip up that bad, they could be the ones getting knocked out by them easily.
Yeah.
So, but for mine, I would have to say if my final 4 would be Canes, Lightning, and then Avs and Flames. And I think it's the Avs and the Canes in the Cup, and I think the Canes take it just because the Avs took that half a step back, and I think the Canes took maybe got a little more solid. That's all. Okay.
Nick Aube-Kubel is somebody who's a tremendous loss for the Avalanche as well. Now,
he's got more rings than G. Mic drop. Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hey, look, he was in the right place at the right time. Never my favorite player, but when he brings value, he has a valuable contribution. But okay, so
yeah, it was sure a valuable contribution when he dropped the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Doinked it. There's a big dent.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
There's a big dent that cost a lot of money.
Well, I can't dispute that. Okay, so in the West, for me, your major contenders are definitely, obviously, the Avalanche, the Oilers, and the Flames. I think Vegas Golden Knights and Minnesota are more in the dark horse category. And then in the East, it's the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Rangers, Carolina, and Toronto. And then Florida is more of a dark horse. Like Kevin said, they've been depleted. So here's the thing. I think Colorado's depleted enough where they're a little bit more vulnerable. I don't believe in Edmonton. I don't think their upgrading goal is enough. I think Calgary actually on paper is the only team that can really match Colorado. I just don't know if you can make that many changes, even with an experienced Stanley Cup winning coach, and expect them to be able to put it together to challenge the Avalanche. And I am concerned in terms of Avalanche, and I'm jumping from team to team, with Georgiev and whether he is going to be able to assume the mantle. But since I'm picking Colorado to play the Rangers, there's going to be a subplot of Georgiev in the starting role playing against the Rangers. And I'm going to pick the Rangers to win because I like their goaltender. And I think some elements are going to come together there. And when you have the best goalie in the league, and I think that Shesterkin is, and if you can get a little bit more out of Kakko and you can get more, development that we saw with Lafreniere, I just like this. I think they have a closer as a coach in Gallant. And I would have felt better with Florida. I didn't like Paul Maurice. I didn't like that hire. And I think they took a lot of hits. Florida, if you show up the way Florida didn't show up in the playoffs, you need a guy like Laviolette. They should have hired Tortorella, if anything, because even with all the changes, Maurice has never won anything. And he's always been a good coach, but he's the guy that gets fired and replaced by a Laviolette or a Tortorella or a Gallant. That's the way I look at it. So balancing out all this crazy talk, Carolina's an X factor for me. I think they're going to have to make some trades to bulk up the roster, and it's going to hurt if Pacioretty is out with a Achilles tendon injury, a big loss. He's not going to come back till February, and are we going to get the same Pacioretty? I think they're kind of counting that to fill the void when they got rid of Niederreiter. I think is no longer there. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. But I'm picking the Rangers to upset the Colorado Avalanche. And no, I'm not doing that because I like the Rangers, what they did a couple of years ago. A lot of people are going to accuse me of that. No, I just think the Rangers have the best goalie. And if you have enough around you and you have the best goalie, you can really overcome a lot. We saw that with Patrick Waugh in 86 and 93. We saw that Hasek taking what I didn't think was really a great Buffalo team in 99. And, if not with Brett Hull with his foot in the crease, they break that barrier and become Stanley Cup champions. And of course, Hasek did win it in 2002, I believe, with Detroit Red Wings finally. So that's what I'm going with. So anyway, that was enough scrambly explanation for my rationale. But Kevin, it's been so great to have you again. Any final thoughts or things that we didn't cover tonight before we ask you to tell us where we can find your work?
No, I don't think so. I think we got to a lot of it. Just looking forward to the season. It's funny. I'm saying looking forward to the season starting, and it's already 2 games in technically because there was games on
the games
over the weekend. Over the weekend,
that was weird.
It's weird, but certainly interesting nonetheless. Actually, we're 24 hours away from all the other stuff starting though, and actual games being back on and everything like that. And it's going to be an interesting year around here, but I'm going to be down there as much as I can, and I know you guys are going to be doing your thing too. So, we're all along for the ride. So let's just enjoy what parts of it we can, I guess, or enjoy being hockey fans again too, because, whenever we get that time to watch, I know that I start looking forward to certain guys coming in too, to get a good look at them in person. So I'll be doing that again this year too. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And we can find you at, you're going to make appearances on 97.3 ESPN on the radio. And of course, you have your podcast. You would think.
Yeah, so I'll be on there. Well, I'll be on 97.3 as much as I can, I guess, this season. Right now, like I made a joke with somebody the other day. I feel like it's just it maybe coincidence, whatever the case may be, that the Phillies won their playoff round last weekend, so that this way, as the Flyers season gets started, I can still be totally irrelevant for another week because everything else is going on right now. But nonetheless, I'll be making some appearances over there during the course of the season. Podcast is the YWT podcast. You would think podcast. So, we just had a pretty good episode yesterday that we recorded, was put out on all the platforms last night. So check it out and get to hear more of me talk about a lot of the same type of things I talked about with you guys tonight, but also further predictions for around the league, because we did all 8 playoff teams on each side. So you'll find out who I have making the playoffs, because I did leave, on each side I left somebody interesting out. So that's for sure.
Check that out.
One other thing I will say is this, because I mentioned it on the YWT yesterday. Normally, and you guys have me on because I'm down at the arena, if I can be 41 times out of 41 a year, and this week I won't be because I'm going away starting on Wednesday, and I'll be away for about a week. So my first home game of the year will be on the 23rd when they play San Jose. But that doesn't mean, just because I'm going to be away, it doesn't mean I'm not going to do my best to kind of provide articles for the games. I won't really have in-person game coverage. I'm out in California for a wedding, but that doesn't mean hockey's not on my mind, because I may tweet about another activity while I'm out there that's still hockey related in the early goings of that trip. So you'll have to see where I pop up while out in California, because I have something planned to take in something while I'm out there.
Oh, great. Yeah. Keep us apprised of that. Make sure you follow Kevin on Twitter and yeah. So to reveal that mystery to be revealed, and you can follow Kevin on Twitter at Kevin_Durso. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on, and we look forward to having you back sometime very soon.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Anytime, guys.
All right, you take care now.
You guys too.
Later, Kev.
Take care,
guys.
All right, so Chef, yeah.
What more can we say? Just bring it on, baby.
Yeah, just bring it on. Sorry, I was rambling there a little bit with my Stanley Cup predictions. I was trying to cover all the bases, get all my information out. And I know that people are hanging on every word. Not really.
Oh, yeah.
So, Chef, any final thoughts? And see us out with your contact information.
No, I think what more can we say? Because we haven't really seen enough. The systems aren't installed yet because, the coach didn't know what the players, how they were going to respond or what they do. I think that was a challenge to them to rise up, to earn their spot on the team, and maybe some of the young guys steal it away from the vets. But, whatever happens. And from now on, we're going to see what this team is going to be like. Are they going to, and I don't mind it losing. I really don't. If a lesson can be learned from it, and I see a better team emerging from the ashes after every win, I'll be happy with that. I just want something you can build upon. Losses teach you just as much as wins do. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And people can follow you at Chef to the Left B on Twitter, right?
Yes, sir.
You got it. You can follow me, Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah, don't forget that _ 520 on Twitter. Of course, like we mentioned earlier, the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. So we're probably going to let 4 games or so play out. We'll let you know what our next show is. We have a guest lined up that we think you're going to like, and then we'll have some real action to talk about instead of basing things on exhibition games. And we all know all of these games, and I think Tort said it earlier, we're going to forget a lot of these games a month from now, because we're going to be ensconced what the team is against guys that are given 100% versus playing against minor leaguers, never have beens, never will be's, and vets that are playing like about 80%. So until next show, everybody, thanks for joining us on our season preview. Take care.